your seat and put up your yellow placard.
All right, great. So I am Director Janine Reed, Finance Director, and happy to be with you all today. We've got a great agenda for you, and we will hopefully, we're going to move through this fast, but also if we have time, we'll take questions, okay? So today we're going to do a brief introduction, walk through year-to-date actuals to budget, talk about fund balance, our bond ratings, some additional updates, PAFR, which you guys all received, and then do a little quick Q&A. So introduction. So one thing that the finance department has been doing, we have been doing a collaborative effort within the department. We went out and hired a facilitator to help us rewrite and look at our vision, our mission, and our guiding principles. Now, why is this important? Because we are also developing KPIs and goals within each division that will give us a roadmap of where we want the finance department to be over the next 3 to 5 years. And I thought it was important that you all know that we are doing this work. We are really engaged in this work and actually really excited about this work. So let's dig right into our year-to-date actuals to budget. So as a reminder, where does the money come from? So the majority of our revenue comes from property tax, followed by sales tax, and then other government agencies, all other revenue. And then as a reminder, in the FY26 budget ordinance, we did use about $20.5 million worth of fund balance to balance the budget. So let's look at property tax first. And we broke property tax down into the 3 primary categories: personal property, public utility, and real property. And so if you remember, this is really 3 months worth of collections, because the bills for the property tax, for current property tax, don't really go out until the end of September or the 1st of October. And our primary collection months are December and February, okay? So through the month of December, and I'm gonna talk about real property first, we are tracking at a collection rate of about 40.1%. Now, if I compare that to prior years was 40.3%. So we are comparable year over year in terms of real property tax collections. The other thing I will point out is our real property tax budget last year was $1.4 billion, $1.48 billion. And that is an increase in budget year over year in terms of real property tax of about $460 million. So all that to say that when you think about the increase in the budget year over year and then maintaining that collection rate year over year means that we are really tracking in line with the budget. On personal property and public utility, those percentages are also tracking in line. I don't want anyone to be alarmed by the amount that we have collected through December. The timing of those collections comes in the spring mainly. And so if I look year over year at those collection percents, those are tracking as well, very similar to FY25. All right, let's look at our next large revenue source, which is local option sales tax. I have a similar story on this as well compared to property tax. I do want to remind everyone, although this is December and you think it's 6 months of collections, it's actually only 4 months of collection. And that is because there is a 2-month lag in the time when we get sales tax versus when it's remitted from the businesses. Okay, so this is really collections that relate to July, August, September, and October. So October's revenue is received by Metro in December. Okay, so Collection percentage, if you look at the 240 versus the 737 in terms of budget, that collection percent is right at 32.5%. Last year at this time, we were tracking at 31.3. So that is a growth in collection rate of about 1.2%. So as we sit in December, we're thinking sales tax looks really good and that we're trending ahead of budget. However, please hold that thought because there's more to come on sales tax on a later slide, and it's in relationship to the winter storm. Yeah. All right. Next. Other revenues. So this is not all of the revenue categories. We could not fit all those on a slide. So these are the primary other revenue streams that we monitor and look at. Some of these revenue streams are tracking ahead of last year. Some of those are tracking below where they were last year. But all in all, I'm happy to say that through December, we are tracking to budget in terms of revenue. Now, let's look at expenditures. Where does the money go? So again, we have broken this down into the three categories. You guys are familiar with this chart. I do want to point out these numbers on these screens do include the fund balance restoration as well as the budget sustainability. And I'm pointing that out because on the next slide, we took those out when we were looking at, department expenditures compared to actuals. So I want to not go into too much detail here, but what I want to do is explain what we've done on the budget side in engaging departments this year. So this year we reformatted the way we were engaging departments. We called our budget meetings in the fall budget meetings. And we actually brought back the in-person budget meeting back to Metro for the large departments. We blocked off about an hour and a half. We asked departmental leadership to come prepared to talk about their budget. They were welcome to do a presentation as well. They also brought in a lot of financial leadership from within their departments. In those meetings was the Office of Management and Budget, their budget analyst. We also had Kristen Wilson, Chief Operating Officer, as well as OPM, Office of Performance Management, which is Clifton and Steve Lopez. Clifton, hey, thanks. I just lost his last name. I'm sorry, Clifton, if you're watching. And we also had the Office of Impact in those meetings. And so we had large groups come together to really talk through the budgets, like what's happening, what are you seeing, are you tracking well? It was an opportunity for departments to flag any issues that they may see with their budgets. And so we had some really great, robust discussions around the budget process and what was happening in FY26. We also did some look aheads in those meetings about what do you think's on the horizon as you're looking ahead to 27. I'm going to say they were really good meetings. We gained a lot of information and insight, and the departments also gained a lot of great information and insight. We also did fall budget meetings with every single department that wasn't in person. We did those in a virtual setting as well. So in terms of expenditures through December, we are tracking to budget and feel good about where the departments are. Fund balance. One of my favorite topics, as you all know. So just a reminder, this is the fund balance policy that was passed in April of 2025. This set those targets at 17% of operating reserve and 50% for the debt service funds, as well as establishing that budget sustainability reserve of 1 to 6%. And so in the FY26 budget, we restored fund balance of about $64 million in the budget ordinance. Now, some of this was true restoration of fund balance, and some of this was a result of the budget increasing, right? So when your budgeted expenditures go up significantly, the percent of fund balance drops. It's like a mathematical issue. So part of this restoration was to bring the fund balance levels back up to the targets because your expenditures grew so much. The other thing I will say here is this was the establishment of the budget sustainability, which was 2% for all the general service districts and 4% for the urban service district. I'm going to circle back to this because in a new moment, on a different slide, but I do want y'all to remember this. This is a key slide for us. And then these are historical fund balances. So if you look at the fund balances in 22, 23, and 24, those were all high fund balance years. We had more revenue that came in than expenditures, which added to high fund balances above our fund balance policies. There was planned spend down of these fund balances that were approved during the budget ordinance processes in some of those years. So it was planned for our fund balance to drop. But then when we raised expenditures, we had to restore the fund balance to the levels. The one thing I want to point out here, if you go back a few slides and you remember in the budget ordinance, we projected fund balance, right? And we restored fund balance based off of those projections. The one fund that did not hit our projection is the school's fund balance. It was less than what we projected in the budget ordinance. So what does that mean? It means we may need to continue to restore fund balance in the school's fund during the FY27 budget process. Bond ratings. So you guys, council approved a resolution to authorize finance to move forward with a bond issuance. We are pricing those bonds on Thursday. So as part of that process, we have to go and sit down with all three rating agencies and be re-rated for the debt. And so what that entails is we actually sit down and do a presentation to each of the bonding agencies. We also answer questions that they submit to us based off our official statement, and there is a long process. So I am proud to say that we maintained and all of our ratings were confirmed. And if you remember, I said, hang tight because I'm going to circle back to budget sustainability. The new fund balance policy and the budget sustainability was pointed out by each of these agencies in their write-up when they confirmed our ratings. This means that Metro will continue to save as we borrow money for capital projects to the tune of millions of dollars. And so I want to thank each of you who voted for the fund balance policy and set up the fund balance sustainability fund, because it was cited by each one of these agencies as prudent fiscal management, the administration and the mayor's office leaning into this, the council leaning into this, and how important that was. So thank you all so much for that. And then additional updates. And so I want to talk about the pension plan because this was another thing that came up during the ratings calls, and it's something that we really should be proud of. As of June 30, our pension plan was funded at 92.87%. Our plan on an actuarial evaluation has been above 90% since 2015. There are not many municipalities who can say that with pride. So I think this is really great for our employees and something that we should all be proud of. We have over $4.6 billion in our investments. Those are managed by our Treasury office. We added a compliance officer in our Treasury office to manage compliance of those investments. And then the investment committee that sits under the benefit board is responsible for the oversight and investments of the pension plan. We do have an OPEB liability of about $2.7 billion, and that is a pay-as-you-go plan and included in the operating budget as well. And if you don't know what OPEB is, that is employees who retired. They have the option to get the same medical benefits as if they were an employee. And so that is the actuarial of, liability. You won't see that on the fund, FUND statements, but you will see that in the government-wide statement when we do the full accrual. And then looking ahead, so as we look ahead to 27, the Nashville economy continues to be strong. We are remaining cautiously optimistic. I'm going to pause on the expenses for the winter storm because Mary Jo Wiggins is going to join me and talk about the administration of those expenses and how that's going to be handled. The revenue impacts of the winter storm. So we are concerned about sales tax and what that's going to hit our revenue. We do believe there is going to be a slight hit to our sales tax revenue. As soon as we're able to get our arms wrapped around what that impact looks like, we will certainly let you know and the administration know. But things like restaurants were closed, people weren't going out to eat. A lot of the hotels in the area dropped their room rate, which was lovely. And so people could afford to stay in the hotels, but that certainly will impact our sales tax revenue. There may be some possible supplemental appropriations that we would come back to council with later in the year in that April, May, June timeframe. Again, we are monitoring those, and as we sit right now, we have a few that we think may be coming. And then there's possible legislation at the state and federal level that we are always keeping our eyes on. So all in all, as we look to 27, we are early in the revenue projection. But as we sit today, we do believe that our projected revenue growth will be below the projected inflation rate in 27, which what does that mean? It means it's going to be a tight budget. All right, and Mary Jo, do you mind coming up and talking about the expenses for the winter storm? Oh, while Mary Jo is coming up, we did get the PAFR out. We handed each of you a PAFR on your desk, and I hope you get an opportunity to read through it. It is a great document, something that, is designed to be easy to understand, easy to read. It's got a lot of graph and charts in it, so if you have any questions on that, let us know. All right, Mary Jo.
Thank you, Director Reed. I just wanted to very briefly piggyback what Director Reed was sharing with, she mentioned some of the concerns of a revenue impact from the winter storm. As you know, we are really grateful. We did receive the full disaster declaration. So it does mean that Metro is able to submit our expenses to FEMA for reimbursement from the storm. But what's really important to remember is we don't get 100%. So there's two primary areas. One is that with an ice storm or snow, there are a lot of the expenses that FEMA considers to be ongoing normal routine maintenance. They're not normal and ongoing for Nashville. We don't get a lot of snow and ice, but it is still considered part of ongoing maintenance. So there are some of our expenses that we incurred, salting, brining, plowing, that we will not receive reimbursement for. But the second piece, for anybody that was really tracking a lot of our FY20 and FY21 disasters, FEMA allowed a 90% recovery, and then the state gives us half of that difference. So we were receiving 90% of the recovery from FEMA, 5% from the state, and only 5% of Metro. And we're kind of able to make that up. We engage consultants who are really good at optimizing, and we were pretty close to full recovery. FEMA's not in that same position. We now have a 75%, which was the norm, 75% recovery from FEMA, which means we get half of that, 12.5% from the state. Metro's on the hook for the other 12.5%. So the great news is we are getting recovery and reimbursement from FEMA, but it's not going to be complete.
And that's the end of our presentation. I will turn it back over to Chair. I know. I should have ended on bond ratings. Chair, I'll turn it back to you.
Director, can you, for the viewing audience, what does PAFR mean?
PAFR is the Public Annual Financial Report.
Is that online?
It is online. Okay. Yes, ma'am. It is online as well as our ACFR. I am happy to report that all three actually, our ACFR, single audit, and our PAFR are all complete and all online, and the ACFR and single audit were complete this year by 12/31, which is the first time that has been done in maybe 6 years. So we were really excited to get the single audit done by 12/31.
And ACFR means?
Annual Comprehensive Financial Report.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Any questions from council members? Okay. Councilwoman Allen.
Thank you. I want to bring it back to the bond rating. I'm proud of us for being the next to the top line. What would it take to get us to AAA?
So one of the things that was cited was our debt levels, our debt service levels, and how that compares to some of our metrics that we are currently trying to implement and track here at Metro. So debt service per capita, for example, but that was one of the concerns. The other concern is continued diversification of, revenue for the city. And growth of the city. So trying to keep a diversified portfolio of businesses that all operate here. So that was another one. But if anyone would love the write-up from the rating agencies, I am certainly happy to provide those. They actually have a lot of great financial information.
I saw Councilman Spain, then Councilwoman Gamble.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry to go from the bond rating back to the storm expenses, but obviously we're incurring those expenses in real time. What's the delay between when we receive the state and federal portions of that reimbursement?
That's a great question. There's quite a delay. So it's years. It's not even months. I mean, we're still collecting from the March 2nd, 2020 tornado.
So how do we budget for that?
It's a great question and one that we are actually in the process of working through. We have set up specific tracking mechanisms within the accounting system by department and what we call cost center, and that includes MMPS as well. So I want to make sure you know it's not just general government, but there was quite a bit of storm damage as well to some of the schools. So we are tracking all the damage and starting to try and assess what that scale of damage is and how much that is. And once we're able to determine that, what we'll do is to be able, it's a cash, so we will obviously pay our bills, which would impact our cash. That will not necessarily, cash and fund balance are not the same thing. So it will impede on our cash reserves, and there could be a possibility of having to borrow, do interfund borrowing, as y'all know it, it's called the TANs. Tax anticipation notes that are internal to the government, because it will be the cash flow portion of that would be difficult. And then, as Mary Jo pointed out, as things start to settle out, there would be an appropriation from, that needs to be made to cover our portion of the expenses that would not be covered by FEMA or the state. Did I say that right, Mary Jo? Okay.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Gamble.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the great work you all are doing with our bond rating and everything. Following up to Councilmember Spain, is there an opportunity to use ARPA funds that were needed to be expended by 2026? And if I recall, we had done legislation to have a catch-all that if funding wasn't spent and came back, that we could use it for various departments. Don't know if this would qualify, but is there any opportunity there?
Thank you for the question. We do have the ability to reallocate any unused funds. We are looking at having everything spent by 6/30/26. So we really won't know exactly what the impact of the storm at that point. And we have to be careful because that ice storm didn't happen before the obligation dates. We did have some emergency city funding that we used as part of COVID, if you remember the testing and some other emergency funds, but it's unlikely that ARP's going to come into play at all with the ice storm.
Councilwoman Johnston.
Who all is responsible for doing the assessments for the damages so that we know that our estimates are accurate and that all of that information is being aggregated in a proper way so that we know exactly what needs to be reimbursed and it's being done in an expedient way, knowing that there is a large lag time?
So the assessment happens at a couple different levels. Each individual Metro department is actually already submitting their estimates. There's also a FEMA factor. So once the declaration was made, FEMA does come in and review to make sure that if we're saying something's destroyed, they agree it's destroyed. Or what's more likely in this storm is really the piles and the measurement of the cubic feet of the debris that's being picked up. So there's a lot of that assessment with FEMA. But probably the best thing that we've done is engaged consultants that we've used all the way back to the 2010 flood. And they have really done an incredible job for Metro in maximizing our reimbursements. They know FEMA, they work with different regions. We are Region 4, there are other regions. They're just excellent experts of what words to use, how we phrase things to make sure that we're describing what is an eligible expense. So we don't want to lose eligibility because we call it the wrong thing. So they help us maximize.
Is the contractor that you're talking about, is that, because I think I looked it up, Disaster Recovery Services?
Yes.
And we use them for the 2020 tornado as well? I saw that we amended that contract. Is it possible to amend a contract that's already been expired? Because that contract expired in 2022.
We have two different contracts. So there is an active current contract that expires at the end of 12/31/26. So we will likely have to extend that contract and probably add some value.
Because the amendment that I saw was amending the expired contract, which I thought was weird.
It might be the other contract. There was a contract specific for the 4 disasters. So there was one for the tornado, derecho, the COVID, and the spring storm.
Are we using GIS, like with IT, in the IT department to sort of help with that assessment at all with technology, drone technology, or any of that?
Part of the FEMA requirements actually require us to submit GPS coordinates for trees that are down. So yes, we use quite extensive technology and also GPS.
Thank you.
All right. Councilwoman Porterfield.
Thank you, Chair. Councilmember Johnson just sparked a question for me. Since this is going to take years to do this recovery process, do we have any checks and balances in place to kind of make sure nothing falls through the cracks? If we're talking about a multi-year recovery, there's like staff turnover, you know, there will be an we don't know who will be in certain positions over the course of several years. So we don't want someone who is like tracking this to no longer be in a position to track it. So do we have like any checks and balances in place to make sure that this doesn't like fall through the cracks?
We do, and we've been fortunate that we have had the same consultants since 2010, same 2 individuals. They know us well, they know our departments well, but we have OEM, who is really the primary tracking and gathering the expenses, but now finance comes in on another side to make sure that we're looking at what's being submitted to FEMA, also is what's in our general ledger, as far as if we've claimed that there's an expense and charged it, we're gonna make sure we submit it. And so finance does that, and there are multiple layers of finance. So it's not just me.
And I had one quick question, because I didn't see you. Councilman Dreffel, I'll go to you first.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Chair. I appreciate that. I'm sure your question's better than mine. But anyhow, we're close to budgeting for next year. Have you, and you're saying that we're very close to the year end and projections. Have you come up with any expense increases or revenue projections for 26, 27 that we can anticipate?
We have actually we are starting the budget process. So we did our budget kickoff meeting. We actually brought it back and did it in person this year. So we've released the budget memo. We did a meeting with all the department heads and kicked off the budget. We have budget meetings scheduled. So departments are actually submitting their budget modification request already through the system. And then we actually are starting budget meetings next week, and those will continue 4 weeks with the exception of spring break. So we are in the process of working through kind of the budget modifications request, meeting with each department. We're actually also at the same time working on all of our revenue projections as well. We do that internally, but we also contract with University of Tennessee, Knoxville, who helps do us some stuff for the state. So that work really leans in well as we're working on Metro's projections.
Thanks. So is there any targets that we can anticipate? Because obviously we're going to be getting requests and people already commenting on needs. Is there a target request that you're anticipating to use as a guideline for next year?
We have not done that. We did not include that in the budget memo. We did ask departments to take into consideration what we are anticipating to be a difficult budget and to really be thoughtful about their request as we move into the budget process, but no target.
Okay, thanks so much.
No, thank you. Great question.
So I don't see anyone else's hand. So my question deals with the debt service. So for the past 5 years or so, we've made, as a city, made some historic and needed investments in our neighborhoods and infrastructure, which I know has kind of driven up that debt ratio a little bit. How far off are we from the cities that have the AAA, the highest rating?
I don't have that in front of me, Councilmember Toombs, but I will certainly be glad to get you that information.
Thank you.
But we have a ways to go, I can tell you that.
Okay.
The one thing I am happy to say is we did apply this year. The comptroller actually started an excellent award, and we were the first municipality to actually complete that and apply. And so we are hopeful that we are going to be a role model for the state in terms of our fiscal stability and financial compliance with policies and requirements. I'll end on a positive note. How about that?
Thank you, Director Reed. Very good presentation. Last call for questions, seeing none. Thank you. All right, committee members, I don't see, I'm looking at the sign-up sheet for public comment, and we didn't have anyone to sign up, so we will move on to the consent agenda. I'm going to read the items that are on consent. If anything needs to come off, if you could raise your hand and I will recognize you. On consent, RS 2026-1787, 1788, 1789, 1790, 1791, 1792, 1793, 1794, 1796, 1797, Bill 2026-1253, and Bill 2026-1258. Does anything need to come off of consent? Councilwoman Allen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we take Bill 2026-1253 off consent, please?
1253. All right, that is item number 42. Does anything else need to come off of consent? Seeing no hands, I'm going to read the captions. And again, if anything needs to come off, you can raise your hand and I will recognize you. Item number 1, Resolution 2026-1787, Allen Ewing Toombs and Evan Siegel, resolution extending the provisions of Chapter 5.11 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws as enacted under ordinance number Bill 2021-972. Resolution 2026-1788, Toombs, Huffman, Welsh, and Stiles, resolution accepting a grant from the Marjorie A. Newhoff Private Foundation, Inc. to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through the Metropolitan Board of Health to provide funding for the care of shelter animals and Metro Animal Care and Control. Resolution 2026-1789, Toombs, Vaux, Swar, and Welsh. Resolution accepting an in-kind grant for the Nashville Public Library Foundation to the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, acting by and through the Nashville Public Library to provide funding for library program enhancements and improvements. Resolution 2026-1790, Toombs, Vaux, Swar, and Welsh. Resolution accepting grants for the Nashville Public Library Foundation to the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, acting by and through the Nashville Public Library to provide funding for certain program positions and enhancement funding. Resolution 2026-1791, Toombs, resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle the personal injury claims of Jerry and Reba Hayes against the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County for $48,000, with said amount to be paid out of self-insured liability fund. Resolution 2026-1792, Toombs and Huffman, resolution approving a contract between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County and GovCIO LLC to provide ATS Voyager message switch and interfaces maintenance and support services. Resolution 2026-1793, Toombs and Huffman, resolution accepting an in-kind grant from the Nashville Police and Public Safety Alliance to the Metropolitan Government, acting by and through the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department to fund MNPD personnel to access digital resources to connect with a network of individual and corporate care providers and access online content. Resolution 2026-1794, Toombs, Evan, Siegel, Hill, and Allen. Resolution accepting the terms of a cooperative purchasing master agreement with Scranton Manufacturing Company, Inc., DBA New Way Trucks, for refuse and recycling equipment for the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Department of Waste Services. Resolution 2026-1796, Toombs, resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle the property damage claim of Fiend Wardlaw against the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County in the amount of $53,954.40, with said amount to be paid out of the self-insured liability fund. Resolution 2026-1797, Toombs, resolution authorizing the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County's property damage claim against Mass Tech North America, Inc. in the amount of $135,000, with said amount to be paid to the Water Operating Fund 67331. All right, item number 44, Bill 2026-1258, Toombs and Evans Siegel, an ordinance approving Amendment 2 to a contract between the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County and Hydromax USA LLC for valve exercising and hydrant maintenance services. Is there anything that needs to come off of consent? Seeing none, can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting or abstaining, motion carries. How many people? All right, we do have item number 11, a late file resolution. Toombs Wiener, resolution authorizing the waiver of certain permit fees for the repair or rebuilding of property damaged as a result of the January 2026 winter storm. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting or abstaining, motion carries. Now we are on to bills on second reading and our favorite set of 30-plus bills. These are the NDOT contracts, which is item number 12 through 41. And we can take these as one lump, right? Okay. Item number 12 through 41, Bill 2026-1206 is the item number 12. Ordinance approving a contract for technical and engineering services between Fairport Planning LLC, Gresham Smith, GRW Engineers, Inc., HW Lochner, Inc., HDR Engineering, Inc., Los and Associates, Inc., Neil Schaefer, Inc., Nelson Nygaard Consultant Associates, Inc., Orchards Hiltz and McClemick, Inc., Parsons Transportation Group, Inc., Bora Hamakara Gupta, CDM Smith, Inc., Collier Engineering Company, Consul North America, Inc., Crawford Murphy Tilley, Inc., AECOM Technical Services, Inc., Alfred Benesh and Company, Alta Planning and Design, Inc., Arcadis US, Inc., Barge Design Solutions, Inc., Jacobs Engineering Group, Inc., Johnson Mirmaran and Thompson, Inc., KCI Technologies, Inc., Kimley Horn and Associates, Lamar Dunn and Associates, Reagan Smith Associates, LLC, Smith Seckman Reed, Inc., Stantec Consulting Services, Inc., Volkert, Inc., WSP USA, Inc., and the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay, Councilwoman Suara.
Thank you, Chair. I have a specific question about a specific contractor, and that will be on BL 2026-1218 with Collier Engineering. And my question will be to Finance.
Okay.
All right. Last time, I remember when I was on the audit committee, there was a series of audit findings relating to this particular vendor. And I do remember that it stems from wrong billing and a whole lot of things. And seeing the name again, I just wanted to know why we're still doing business with them and what happened post that audit.
If you could introduce yourself and you're recognized at the back table.
Zach Kelly, Department of Finance, Division of Purchases, and thank you, Councilmember Suara, for the heads up on this so that I didn't look like a donkey up here. The answer to your question is that the contractor that you've asked about is a contractor that is in good standing with Metro and has been in good standing with Metro. The audit that you referenced was requested by Councilmember Vercher at the time based on an issue that arose from that individual contractor, but the audit itself actually reviewed all of the A&E contractors who were with Metro at the time. And if you look at that audit, what that audit bore out is that the same or similar issues were present across all four suppliers who were reviewed as part of that audit. It was determined through the course of that audit that the issues identified were primarily issues where the onus to fix them was on Metro, specifically around invoicing requirements across our major departments, water, general services, parks, and NDOT. The former purchasing agent, Michelle Lane, led an effort to standardize those invoices so that you didn't have different invoice forms being used for different departments. And then we went through a number of other findings in that audit to correct the issues that were raised there. At no time was there any suggestion that this supplier had engaged in any attempt to defraud Metro. Had there been, that would have been a referral to the DA and not a referral back to the purchasing agent to address it through the audit process. And so that's what I can tell you, is that that's a supplier that is in good standing with Metro and eligible for award.
Councilwoman Suara.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that response. Just two quick follow-up. If I remember correctly, it was more about double billing and things like that. Did we ever go back and recover from, now you're saying it may not just be that one, did we ever recover from all the people that were involved? And then number two, since this is the same engineering services, there's a whole bunch of engineering services on this thing that we're looking at. How do we make sure that the issue that happened then, we're not gonna run into the same thing now?
Yes, ma'am. So in reference to the double billing, if you look at the audit, the finding in the audit was not necessarily that any of the contractors had engaged in fraudulent activity or that they had double billed. There was simply an inability to match or substantiate a very small subset of billing that they had provided to Metro. And if you go through the audit, what the auditors make clear is that they stop well short of saying that they did double bill or that there was some sort of fraudulent activity there, and they instead say that there's just an inability to substantiate some things. And so the fix that they offer to that is a better process for invoicing and reviewing, which we did put in place. And again, if there had been fraudulent activity that they identified there, that wouldn't have come back from the audit committee to us. That would have gone to District Attorney Funk for arbitration. In reference to how are we going to make sure that it doesn't happen again? Again, we went through a process. This was in 2020 when this audit came out. Shortly after that, the former purchasing agent, Michelle Lane, led a process to standardize how invoicing was done for A&E. And I can tell you that in the 6 intervening years, we've not had issues. We've not had substantial issues around that.
Ms. Suara.
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Mary Jo. And then maybe one for the administration. So, Ms. Mary Jo, this particular one with NDOT, is it just Metro money or does it have federal money involved?
You're recognized.
Thank you,
Ms.
Chair.
Wiggins.
So the funding for these contracts will be through the Transportation Improvement Plan. So it's Metro money. There may be grants. Is that correct? CSP. So, Metro funds through the capital spending plan and through revenue generated through the tax.
Okay. So the reason why I'm asking is I was trying to figure out this is a big sum of money and so many contractors involved. And what we are approving is a lump sum. We don't have, it says up to that amount is what will be spent. So I'm trying to figure out, will there be any tracking, any auditing? So if it has federal funds, I know it will automatically be part of single audit, but if it doesn't have federal funding, would there be a special audit or some kind of review for this kind of activity that has so much in it and so a large amount involved?
You're recognized.
Thank you. So we track every use through our ERP system of all these contracts. So we'll be able to see how that's what you're approving today is a contract ceiling. And as we've just, in our last committee meeting, we discussed how we're not approving that amount of money. Every project is something that is approved through council. Rather, this is a limit. And so any type of, it could be the Choose How You Move funding, it could be CSP funding, it could be Metro water funding, any type of dollars can be used on these contracts, but we're saying no more than this amount of dollars in the scheme of these projects.
And at the, I'm sorry, and at the point of expenditure, then we will know whether it's choose how you move or
yes.
water or NDOT and all of that.
Oh, yes, we can identify that through our system.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Councilwoman Evans Siegel.
Thank you, Chair. We had a brief presentation on this in transportation and infrastructure, and it was helpful to think about how these funds are going to be spent, because I think there were two buckets. And one bucket is like a mini RFP bucket. My understanding is that is primarily what Choose How You Move will use, as well as projects that involve TDOT, because that is what TDOT has approved for using this process. But then there's another bucket of funds that are what are called the round robin funds. And the round robin funds are like, you got 30 vendors who qualify. They're going to be ranked on a list. We just go down the list, and then that list gets sort of resorted after we've gone through it to account for who hasn't made as much money. Those folks kind of move up to the top, and it just cycles round robin on POs like that. So there's no specific kind of mini RFP that is sent out. There's no like competitive bidding. It can just be awarded. I know that we have, and I'm saying all this because I think it's going to be helpful background for this committee. And then I also have a question kind of related to it that we didn't get to in transportation and infrastructure. But one of the things that came up in transportation and infrastructure is we have done IDIQ in NDOT, but what NDOT wasn't able to say is the extent of that, and I think the scope of that has actually been much smaller than what this will be, which doesn't mean that this can't be okay, but we had a lot of questions around process, like how many people do we have at NDOT who are going to be looking at these round robin deals and making sure there's not scope creep and that there is not sort of excessive billing or changes to what is being asked of the contractor? How are we going to navigate which contractor is doing what? What we ended up doing, because some of those questions couldn't be answered in committee, is we approved it on second with a re-referral to transportation and infrastructure on third, because I think it's going to be really important that as we look at what is effectively approving rates for $1.3 billion over 8 years. And some of that will be CSP funding, but NDOT specifically does use engineers for regular budgeting. There are things that we do in our regular budget process that are not CSP funding, but are what I call June funding. I think we all think of as June funding, where we are using engineering services. And this can also be used by other departments who need engineers, and those may or may not fall into CSP funding projects. They may be regular budgeting projects. And think of, like routine maintenance on greenways, for example, may require engineering. That's not a capital improvement project. That's a regular maintenance project, but that Parks Department could still use these. And so sort of how we're going to manage that process is still a real open question, which isn't to say it's not a question we can answer, but we weren't sort of able to get the process questions. We've asked a lot of those on the record in Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, like how many we've done in the past, how many people we have on staff who can manage it, how much of this we're going to bring in over time. But for the purposes of budget and infrastructure, there was sort of an open question in transportation or budget and not transportation infrastructure. There was an open question in transportation and infrastructure around doing this in-house versus sending this out. And for the purpose of budget, all the research I've read on transit funding suggests that using outside contracts like this, relying on outside vendors for large capital projects over time actually significantly increases cost. And there are a lot of studies on this that show that when government is outsourcing contract after contract after contract, that that is what is leading to a lot of the transportation excess costs that we see in the United States over and above other places in the world where they have in-house services that can do that. And one of the questions I have for NDOT, which they may not be able to answer tonight, but I'm hoping that we can have by third, is what is the timeline for bringing this in-house, and what percent of our needs do we expect to bring in-house when we're talking about sort of ongoing funding like this?
There's someone from NDOT who wants to address that, and that may be something that requires some follow-up. Director Alacorn, you're recognized.
Good evening, Council, and thank you very much. Diana Alarcon with NDOT. We will, over time, build up capacity within the department that's going to allow us to move in projects. Right now, we just do not have as many in-house engineers as we have of projects that are coming before us, with both through the capital spending plan and what's going to be coming before us with CHIME. But one of the things that CHIME does allow us to do is to build up that capacity in-house. And what y'all have been doing through our budget process over the past 4 years is slowly allow us to build up our capacity as well. So the earlier question that was asked in transportation infrastructure, and I was trying to quickly count up on my fingers in my head the number of project managers that we have in the department. We roughly have right now, and they're called different things, but they are project managing projects at different levels. Some of them are sidewalks. Some of them are bikeways. Some of them are actually project managing through the planning process at this point. Some of them are actually project managing through the construction. So there's like different phases that they're going through. But we have about 20 of them on board that are actually handling different projects at different phases throughout the lifespan of that project. It is our hope, and you'll see it in our budget request, so I'm going to do a little bit of priming right there for y'all, a request to continue to build up that capacity so that we can continue to move these projects in-house with every intention of being able to deliver more, quicker, faster, and cheaper.
Councilwoman Evans Siegel.
Thanks. I think if I could get a little bit more detail, not tonight, but from the department on what they anticipate that looking like, that would be helpful, because
Yes.
I just don't want to set us up for 8 years of overpaying for everything. And then my other question just is we're approving 30, and I understand that different engineers, there are over 60 specialties. We're broken down into, I believe it was 9 sort of master categories. I'm just curious how many total applicants we had and how many we approved.
Mr. Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you. There were 31 offers. We awarded to 30 of them.
Councilwoman Evans Siegel.
So 31 offers means 31 people applied. Sorry, we're just confused.
There are 31 firms that bid on the contracts. There's one that was effectively disqualified because their offer was deficient. The other 30 were awarded, but they were not awarded for every service. As we covered earlier, they were awarded inside of those 9 buckets. So just because you got a contract does not mean that you can perform the full scope of work. You can only perform the scope of work for the bucket in which you were awarded.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Porterfield.
Thank you, Chair. I'm kind of speechless now. Like I had a question and comment, but that last statement just kind of really threw me off. Like I don't understand how we awarded something to everybody that applied. Like that just, everybody gets a trophy. Like I don't understand. If we could get a little bit more clarification around that.
I believe Mr. Kelly was saying there are different categories and everyone didn't qualify for every single category. Mr. Kelly, if you can expound on that, please.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. So this is in the 60-year history of Metro, we've not had a project of this scope with as much resulting work as you're going to see from Choose How You Move. So it is not unusual for Metro contracts to have multiple awardees. It is unusual for them to have this many awardees, but this is also a very atypical project with a timeline on it that is extraordinarily pressing. You effectively have 15 years to get these projects done. So you're going to have a lot more people awarded here. When we went in and the subject matter, and procurement doesn't do this, the subject matter experts in the department do this. They evaluated those offers and they determined who was qualified to perform what work. And it was awarded based on that. So just because, you were awarded a contract, you weren't awarded to cover every service that was in there, but you might have been awarded to cover the communications area or, one of the other 9 buckets. So 30, I understand that 30 can look a bit daunting, but they're not awarded for every service that was scoped in there.
Councilwoman Porterfield.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to pivot. My question, I don't know, I guess the question would be for procurement. How many IDIQ contracts do we have currently?
We have I can get you that number. I don't have it in front of me. IDIQ is a industry best practice. And just to give you some context on that, the reason that we do IDIQ contracts is because the alternative is doing project-specific contracts. IDIQ contracts mean that if I want to build a sidewalk, then I have a contract in place for the building of sidewalks. And as NDOT has that need to build new sidewalks, as Metro Water has that need to repair them, as Parks has that need to build them in parks, then I can do that by simply issuing a purchase order. I don't have to go out and spend 6 months on a 9-foot section of sidewalk. That's the alternative to not having an IDIQ.
Thank you. If I could get some information about how many IDIQ contracts we currently have, that would be very helpful. My question is, I understand that this is time sensitive in the fact that it's like 15 years. I don't understand why the contracts cannot be issued as they are needed as opposed to doing all 30 now. We have council meetings every 2 weeks, so why could they not come to us at the time when the contract is needed, maybe when there's more clarity around the scope of work as opposed to the open-ended nature of the IDIQ contract?
Mr. Kelly.
So I want to go back to something I said in the previous meeting, which is that there is not an open-ended scope of work on this. This is a very specific scope of work. There are 9 buckets that have very specific individual scopes in there. And not only do I have the individual scopes in there, but I also have pricing locked in on those individual scopes of work. So that's a very important element of that. To answer your question about why you couldn't just come when we need them, it's because we can't issue work. Effectively, what you're doing here is you're approving a maximum term of up to 8 years. But until you all approve or don't approve that, then we can't issue any work pursuant to that. So we couldn't engage in a round robin. We couldn't engage in a mini RFP until those contracts were approved.
Thank you, Chair. So are we saying that the work is ready for all 30 contracts that we're looking at, the work is ready to start on all of those contracts right now?
Hi, I'm Christy Schnell with NDOT. So we potentially have multiple projects, right? Because you can issue a purchase order per project. So Chime has a lot of sidewalks, a lot of signals, a lot of projects, right? Metro Water has projects that they want to use. East Bank wants to use the contracts. General Services, Metro Water, there's several different Metro departments. So within all of the Metro departments, yes, I anticipate all 30 being used. We plan on doing the round robin, right? So we're going to go through based on those services, both based on the 9 buckets, and award 1 through 30, right? So, but if the project is in the traffic signals bucket, right, and the next person up doesn't have traffic signals in their contract, obviously you would go to the next person who has traffic signals in that round robin fashion. Or if you're going mini proposal method, then it's a little bit longer period to get to the purchase order. Obviously not as long as going through procurement to do a separate solicitation, but you have that scope, you have subject matter experts that review that scope, score it based on evaluation criteria. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat, Madam Chair. The answer seemed to be, we assume that maybe there's 30 projects ready to roll out. Do we know definitively if all 30 projects are ready to roll out? I'm just trying to understand why we're doing 30 projects right now as opposed to actually rolling out the projects.
30 vendors.
30 vendors, excuse me. Why we're doing that all at once as opposed to rolling it out when the projects are ready to start.
So my understanding is that we have 30 vendors. There are 9 buckets with services in each of those buckets. These vendors, different vendors are qualified to provide services in the different buckets. There are projects out there that are ready to go with different departments that could utilize these contracts with these different, so it's going to give them a list of vendors. If NDOT's ready to do a sidewalk, all the parts that go with the sidewalk, there's a list of vendors that can provide those services, and they can start doing their round robin or their mini RFP. So it's just a list of vendors that can provide a list of services.
I understand, Madam Chair. My question is, are all of those projects ready to roll out now? Do we have to approve all 30 vendors now, or can that be done on an as-needed basis?
So 30 vendors doesn't equal 30 projects.
I understand,
There could be
Madam Chair.
multiple parts of there could be 5 parts to a project, and that's 5 vendors. So 30 vendors isn't 30 projects.
I understand. My question is everything ready to roll out now? Do we have to do all 30 now?
Mr. Kelly.
The short answer to your question is yes, ma'am. That if we did, without these contracts, there are a number of essential services that the government provides that would very quickly be imperiled. Because there's a panoply of services that are under here that in order to maximize both scale and maximize resources that we have bundled into these contracts. And so if we didn't have these contracts, and that's not putting pressure on you, it doesn't have to happen today. I don't want you to feel like that's what I'm saying. But if we were to bring them on a one-off basis, it would be very difficult for us to do that. And we would have no mechanism to select which contracts we bring first.
Thank you. And then my last question, Madam Chair, was, is there any additional council oversight that happens if we approve these after the final approval? If we approve these, is there any additional council oversight? Does council see this again, or do we not see anything until? Is there any additional council oversight from this?
Mr. Kelly.
If the contracts had to be amended in any way, that would come before council. And then NDOT may want to speak to the reports that they're going to produce.
Thank you.
Yes, as we discussed in the Traffic and Infrastructure Committee meeting, so we plan on using procurements, vendor performance tracking mechanisms to track the vendor's performance throughout the life of life of that project, as well as at the end of the project. So that way, after that first initial 3-year term, when we get to the 5 one-year renewals, we'll be able to have that performance data to say, yes, this vendor met the expectations and did what they signed up to do.
Councilwoman Suara, did you have a question?
Yes. And I think one may just have been answered. I was wondering if we have the opportunity to add or remove vendors. Because this is such a long time, and so what if we get into it and somebody's not able to perform, the business closed, or there's a new vendor in town that is doing better. So I think she may have just alluded to that we have the opportunity to amend if we need to change contractors. Is that correct, or are we tied to this? So if we do not use any of these vendors, will we be liable in any way?
So the initial term on these contracts, one thing that NDOT is really good at doing is managing performance. And the reason that these contracts are structured the way that they are, with an initial term of 3 years and 5 optional 1-year renewals, is so that we can do exactly what Christy outlined, which is engage in that vendor performance management process. And if you have vendors that aren't performing, then we'll yank them off, or they won't be awarded in the round robin. They won't have the opportunity to issue RFPs, or we wouldn't extend their contracts beyond the initial 3-year term. We are never tied to a vendor who won't perform.
Okay. And then the other question that I have comes to pricing. I know that you said that in determining this, and I'm shocked about everyone that applied got it too, because I thought the whole point of bidding for things is to look at who can do what, and maybe it's the pricing or the performance and things like that. So the fact that everybody got something seems weird and irregular, and I just think something is weird with that. But pricing now, when you're looking at granting this and determining who gets what project, I think you had alluded to the fact that the pricing was a part of it, and then NDOT also look at the performance, the technical part of it. So in terms of the pricing, are we locked into that price for the duration of all of this, or how does that work when somebody comes and said, I need to increase my fees? I want to understand, because we're looking at this globally and for a long time. How does that work?
So relative to, sorry, there were voices behind me too. So there are, relative to pricing, I'll take that first. Pricing is in the contract, and I can defer to Director Alarcon to explain how they came up with that pricing, but the quick and dirty version of it is that with any contracts, you can't solicit pricing on the front end. So they're not competing on that pricing. Under law, they're not competing on that pricing when they come in. You're engaging in something called a qualifications-based selection, which is just a fancy way of saying we're not considering pricing. Okay, so that's why you don't see the differentiation in the offers on pricing from the start. That pricing is locked into those contracts. We did not, in another atypical version here, we did not negotiate with these vendors on pricing. What we effectively did, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what we effectively did is went through, looked at the average market rates for those services and said to the suppliers, you know, we've evaluated you, you're qualified, you can take these prices or leave them. So that is extraordinarily good pricing that is in those contracts, and we are tied to that pricing with the appropriate escalators in there. I think I answered your questions.
I think you answered it because and that also answered the 30 vendor question in a way because they're not competing on anything other than their skill sets and what they bring to the table.
Correct.
So we're not looking at how much it will cost us and things like that, but we're looking at this is a fixed amount we want to pay, who can best do this job for us? And then we evaluated all of them and say you can do A and you can do B. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Councilwoman Gamble?
Thank you, Chair. I probably have a I do have a question. First, I want to thank the NDOT for their comprehensiveness and looking at potential certified vendors to do this work, contracted vendors to do this work. I also appreciate the diversity in the list of vendors. I noticed at least 2 minority firms, and there may be more. I guess my question is, was there an effort in looking at all of the list of vendors? I guess you said there were 31, one was disqualified, but the 30 that were certified and qualified, was there an effort to look at diversity in the vendors that were selected? Thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
So the Equal Business Opportunity Program was applicable and will be applicable to the projects that come or that are bid out under here. So there will be subcontracting goals that are established. We are, as you know, prohibited by law from doing certain things at the prime level. But this is one of the first times that we've had that kind of participation at the prime level, and we're extraordinarily pleased with that.
Thank you.
Is there any additional discussion on items 12 through 41? We do have a motion on the floor for approval that's been properly moved and seconded. That was not part of the motion. That was the motion in transportation. Councilwoman Evans Siegel.
Chair, to track it with the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee so we can get some of these questions answered, I would move that we approve it with a re-referral to the Budget and Finance Committee so that we can continue discussing.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded to approve with a re-referral to Budget and Finance. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting or abstaining? Motion carries. All right, item number 42, Bill 2026-1253, Toombs, Vo Hill, and others. Ordinance amending certain sections and subsections of Chapter 6.08 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws to allow the Nashville Public Library to assume operations and responsibility for the Nashville Education, Community, and Arts Television Corporation. Can I get a motion? It's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilwoman Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wondered why we're dissolving the NECAT board. And if the library board is the same skill set to do that.
Can you talk about that? Can you answer that? They've already been doing. Okay. I'm going to kick that over to Interim Director Wilson.
Councilmember, the NPL board has already been acting in this capacity for several years now through an intergovernmental agreement that was conducted between NECAT and the Public Library Board, approved by this body through resolution number 2022, RS 2022-1364. This legislation essentially codifies what has been in place, and with the transfer of leadership, the
NECAT.
Yeah, the NECAT board and the community nonprofit that is formally engaged with this would be dissolved. Yes.
And the reason why is, I mean, there's still like 4 remaining members on the NECAT board, which should have like 7 or something. So has this just been a wind down that somebody did a study and determined that we needed? I just wondered. I apologize, I didn't ask this question
Ms.
to
Wiggins?
someone ahead of time.
Thank you, Chair. I'm probably not going to do this exact justice, but I do recall back at the time, it was, there were some space issues, there was a lease, there was, I think, some just budget considerations, and it was considered that it was a really well-aligned, you know, it was similar needs and space and technology, and why not try this to see if we could eliminate some of the additional cost? And so back in the 2022, I think it was an ordinance, to make that official, they said, let's try that, and it's worked great. So I think both parties agree this is a marriage made in heaven.
Councilwoman Porterfield?
Thank you, Chair. Do we know if any of the individuals that are on the NECAP board will maybe be placed on the MPL board at any point? Do we? Administration's gone. I think that would be helpful to know, to make sure that NCAT is being like properly represented on the board. I guess I will speak that into the universe since nobody's here to answer that question.
Nothing. Let's see. Is this on the, this is on the library committee's agenda.
Oh. Can I renew my question since administration's in here?
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question for the administration was, do we know if there will be any consideration for the anyone from the NECAP board to be able to serve on the libraries board to make sure that there is like adequate representation of the needs of NECAT on the library board?
Mr. Rosenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilman, were you talking about members of the board itself or the folks who are working with NECAT? Or I can answer both. There is a board. Yes, the board is sparse at this moment as part of the wind down, but absolutely they would be considered for service on the library board if they're so inclined.
Any additional discussion on Bill 2026-1253? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting or abstaining? Motion carries. Item number 43, Bill 2026-1255, an ordinance amending Chapter 13.08 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws related to sandwich board signs in the public right-of-way, sponsors Huffman and Orton. Can I get a motion?
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion, Councilmember Huffman?
Thank you, Councilmember Toombs. In the previous Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I made a recommendation to the committee that it was be deferred 2 meetings. They followed that up. So I would just like to make that motion again in this committee. We're still working just a few things out, and I think 2 meetings would give us enough time.
Okay. Is there a second for the 2-meeting deferral? It's been properly moved and seconded to defer 2 meetings. Councilwoman Porterfield?
Never mind.
Sure. Okay. Any discussion on the 2-meeting deferral? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Any not voting or abstaining? Motion carries. What's Gotcha. All right. That concludes the agenda. And that's right now? Yes. Okay. All right, that concludes Budget and Finance, and we do have a joint Budget and Finance and Planning Committee meeting right now. I'll do it.